Over the past few years, airplanes have become much safer and more efficient. However, for many people, there's just always that nagging feeling that something might go wrong. If you're such a person, don't worry because you're not alone. The landing is one of the most important parts of the entire flight process, so it's beyond important that it goes without a hitch. And if you've ever seen any movies about plane mishaps, you can imagine just how chilling it can feel when the pilot suddenly announces over the speakers that there's going to be a bumpy landing. From landing on airstrips to situations where the airplane almost hit other structures, this video will go through 20 of the craziest, most dangerous plane landings ever seen. Number 20. The F-9F Panther fighter jet landing. The United States military spends billions of dollars on an annual basis on their fighter jets, which they use to protect everyone. Now, for fighter jets to be effective in naval missions, they need to rely on aircraft carriers. So if there's ever an incident on the seas, the military can easily send out aircraft carriers with fighter jets on them instead of, relying on Poseidon to come lift them out or something. In 1951, Commander George Duncan was about to touch down with the F-9F Panther aboard the USS Midway, a vessel that had served in World War II. According to reports, he had been testing the aircraft and made a successful landing earlier, and on the second attempt though, he appeared to have made a fatal flaw, causing the F-9F to sink below the Midway's flight deck, and then it crash-landed, bowling into a ball of fire. Fortunately for Commander Duncan, the crash caused the cockpit to detach from the rest of the plane, and so he survived. The footage would also serve as a learning aid for naval aviators and pilots, so in the end, some good did come out of it. Number 19. B-767 landing in Antarctica. If you know anything about Antarctica, it's probably that it's one of the strangest places in the world. The entire continent is pretty much covered in snow, making it one of the coldest and borderline uninhabitable places on the planet. Now, for a continent that's entirely covered in snow, you can only imagine how crazy it would be to land a plane in Antarctica. I mean, the runways themselves are covered in snow, so if you're a pilot with a slight visual impairment, you might be in for a bit of a rough landing. For a perfect example of this, we should consider footage of a B-767 aircraft that landed at Troll, a Norwegian research station in Antarctica. You can just see how there's pretty much nothing but snow everywhere, and even the landing strip is difficult to see. To be fair, you have to give the pilot some credit, but it's sure to be gut-wrenching to have to go through that. Number 18. The Miracle on the Hudson. This is one of those events that would probably need no introduction. On a fateful day in January of 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 took off from LaGuardia Airport in New York, bound for Charlotte, North Carolina. Shortly after the flight would take off, however, First Officer Jeffrey Skiles caught a line of birds moving close to the plane at the corner of his eye. Those birds had moved too close, and it was impossible to maneuver around them, and just like that, the birds collided with the engines, causing an immediate failure. Captain Sully Sullenberger immediately knew that it would be impossible for them to land the plane anywhere else, so he took action immediately, choosing to land in the Hudson River. Even though it was a risky move that could easily cause everyone to drown, Captain Sullenberger went for it, and he literally saved the lives of 150 people.
These are the very first images of the plane in the water, captured by our cameras moments after it.
The fact that the captain was able to get the plane to land in the river and get everyone out in one piece was nothing short of a miracle, so it's no wonder he had several movies made to honor him, including one that even starred Tom Hanks. Number 17. A landing without wheels. When it comes to landing a plane, you really only need the landing gear and its wheels. However, when one Polish pilot discovered his wheels were non-existent, he decided then to improvise. In November of 2011, a Polish Airlines flight carrying about 231 passengers departed Newark for Warsaw. But within half an hour of their takeoff, the crew had gotten a briefing that the plane's center hydraulic system had failed. They decided to continue on to Poland so that they could use up the fuel needed for the flight, and upon reaching their destination, the pilots were shocked to find that the plane's landing gear would not deploy. They informed air traffic control in Warsaw that they couldn't lower the landing gear, and the captain decided to circle around the airport for over an hour so that they could give the grounds crew time to prepare for an emergency landing.
Captain Tad Vrona had spent the last hour and 20 minutes trying to lower the wide-body 767's landing gear, all of its wheels and its braking system, but to no avail. And he had no choice but to belly flop the plane with its engines acting like the runners of a sled onto a concrete runway.
Passengers would be informed and were already preparing themselves for the worst, but miraculously, the captain was able to get the job done, even though it was a heart-wrenching experience to say the least.
And then it happened. Flight 16 touched down at more than 140 miles an hour.
I wonder who would get to play the captain of this movie. Does Poland have their own version of Tom Hanks? Because if he's not busy, they should get him on the phone. Number 16. Aloha Airlines Flight 243. You know those situations where things just seem to be too unbelievable to be true? I think this one definitely qualifies as that. In April of 1998, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 had taken off from Hilo in Hawaii. The flight, which was heading to Honolulu, seemed pretty routine, but after the plane had reached a normal flight altitude, a section of its fuselage suddenly ruptured. The plane had been about 24,000 feet in the air when the fuselage ruptured, and all of a sudden, it had quite literally become a convertible. Fortunately, the distance between the plane's origin and the destination was not very far, and 10 minutes later, Captain Bob Schornsteimer managed to get it down to an airport in Maui. All in all, every passenger on the flight was safe, although some did feature minor injuries. However, one of the flight attendants, Clarabelle Lansing, was sucked out of the plane as she reportedly tried to grab the intercom to speak with passengers, and her body was never recovered. Number 15. Delta Flight 5176. If you're generally scared of flying, then you'll probably be mortified when a plane that you're in suddenly runs through a thunderstorm. In actuality, though, thunder is not necessarily a threat to planes, no more than rain or snow. And with pilots themselves being well trained to maneuver storms, you don't necessarily have much to worry about. Here's the thing though, all that is in theory. Try being rational when you're tens of thousands of feet in the air and you see lightning literally strike close to the plane. In 2016, a Delta Airlines flight was set to make a landing at an airport in Omaha, Nebraska, when it would encounter a bit of turbulence and a couple of lightning strikes. You can just feel the tension as the plane struggles to maintain balance and lightning strikes go off in the distance. At some point, in fact, the lightning appears to have come eerily close to hitting the plane's wing. I wonder who could have been responsible for that.
Because of him. Me.
Fortunately for the passengers, the captain was able to land the plane safely and without angering the gods of thunder any further. Landing a plane in a thunderstorm is not so unusual, but it is surely dramatic. Number 14. Landing at Maho Beach. When ranking dangerous airports to fly into, you definitely want to consider those that seem to be around public utilities. And when it comes to airports dangerously close to places where people stay, you should look no further than the Princess Juliana International Airport in St. Martin. The airport, which is one of the busiest on this Caribbean island, is located just beside Maho Beach. No, I'm not kidding, there's literally an airport right by the beach on this island. The runway at the Princess Juliana Airport measures 7,100 feet in length, and to touch down there, a plane would need to fly in at an incredibly low altitude, so low in fact that many of the planes that do land tend to look like they're just flying over the heads of beachgoers. It's a pretty cool sight to see, of course, and because of the proximity, Maho Beach has actually become a hotspot for tourists and adrenaline junkies alike. But this isn't to say that it's all fun and games. Check out this footage from a plane that's taking off from the airport. I came to the beach and ended up getting all dust in my eyes. Number 13. Landing after a hailstorm. Environmental factors are amongst the biggest concerns that pilots need to face when working. And amongst those environmental concerns, one thing that all pilots dread would have to be hailstorms. Hailstorms can be terrifying, seemingly coming out of nowhere, and they can leave a devastating effect on the entire plane. A few years back, a Ukrainian pilot would find this out the hard way as he looked to land an Atlas Global passenger airplane at Istanbul's Ataturk Airport during a massive storm. The Airbus A320 plane would be carrying about 122 passengers, along with 6 crew members, when a hailstorm hit the plane and essentially damaged its nose. The captain was unable to see, although he had already initiated the landing sequence, and there was no going back. The result would become a truly frantic landing process that would leave anyone shaken. Number 12. A hanging pilot. Considering that planes have to fly at incredibly high altitudes, it should come as no surprise that they also need to be highly pressurized. In June of 1990, a British Airways flight took off from Birmingham International Airport and was on its way to the Spanish coastal town of Malaga. Unfortunately, one of the windscreens on the plane had been poorly installed, and of all the windscreens, it was literally the one in front of the pilot in the cockpit. Immediately, it came loose, and Captain Tim Lancaster was literally sucked out of the plane. He had taken off his seatbelt since the plane was already at cruising altitude, and the quick decompression in the cabin literally pulled him out. Fortunately for the captain, his knees had been caught in the flight controls, preventing him from being entirely sucked out. With his body being limp and his head constantly hitting the plane's side, the captain's co-workers presumed that he had died, and it also didn't help that the plane was descending at a quick rate, gaining speed. Against all odds, the plane was able to land at the nearby Southampton airport. All of the passengers survived, and even Captain Lancaster managed to live to tell the tale, albeit with a few injuries, fractures, severe frostbite, and even some shock trauma. Number 11. A wet splash landing. For the next video, I'll take you to Mali, the capital of the Maldives. While the country is known for its scenic beaches and lovely weather, this landing was anything but beautiful. Back in 2014, pilots of a Boeing 767 jet had been looking to touch base at an airport in Mali, and they tried to do so despite a severe storm splashing against all sides of the plane. The rain was so intense that the pilots could barely even see where they were going, and the men were practically flying blind. Eventually, a small view of the runway cleared beneath the plane, giving the pilots a bit of leeway. And as they got closer and closer, they somehow managed to get that baby to land. There are no words to describe this procedure except for wow. Number 10. The Thunderbolt Landing. In 1991, Captain Paul P.J. Johnson, commander of the Air Force's 355th Fighter Wing, would be serving on a mission when he found himself in some pretty uncomfortable situations. The captain was piloting the A-10 Thunderbolt II, a single-wing fighter jet that would be developed for the Air Force, and for this specific mission, he appeared to have been flying over some very murky ground cover.
I'd been there too long. The weather was interfering. It was past time to throw in the towel and go home. But my fangs had come out. I'd driven my fangs through the floorboard, grown one eyebrow and said, I'm going to go kill this thing.
Sadly, the captain made a huge miscalculation. He had lost visual and communication with the second airman and had unwittingly walked right into a trap. Enemy forces shot his jet down with missiles, and it should have been game over at that point.
Suddenly, what feels like a sledgehammer just hammers my wing, and the airplane hard rolls to the right.
One's hit!
Despite the crazy hit, Johnson actually managed to land the jet, and I don't know how he did it, but he did, and that's something to be applauded. Number 9. 2 to Tango. Managing an airport is not the most easy thing. It's especially difficult when you have to manage a busy airport. With different planes coming in and going out, any small hiccup and the situation could be catastrophic. Back in 2014, Barcelona's El Prat received a massive scare after there seemed to have been a huge communication error between the two planes. As the footage shows, one of the planes was getting ready to take off and completing the taxi process. The problem, however, was that another was just getting ready to come in.
053 would be available for us. I guess it's for
Instead of giving way for each other, both pilots continued on like business as usual. The result would be a nail-biting scenario, as both the planes came dangerously close to hitting each other. Fortunately, the pilot of the incoming plane was quick enough to get it back in the air and avoid the collision. Nobody would be hurt, although everyone must have been mortified. Number 8. A beach party. Once again, we return to the salty seas for a scenario that was truly hysterical. Back in 2021, visitors at Florida's Cocoa Beach were given quite the treat after they witnessed a truly weird sight. It had appeared to be a regular and sunny day until the beachgoers were disturbed by the sound of a BM Avenger barreling down from the sky. According to reports, the plane was actually a World War II-era aircraft that had been restored in preparation for the Cocoa Beach Air Show. Some plane enthusiasts decided to give this baby one more ride, and it did not go as planned.
Oh!
According to the air show's organizer, the plane had suffered a mechanical error and was unsuitable for flying. Considering that the poor thing was decades old, I thought that would pretty much be clear. Some people do really love to test fate. Fortunately, the pilot made it out safely, and no beachgoer would be hurt in the process. Perhaps next time they should get a refund from their mechanic. Number 7. A hard thud. In June of 2018, a Korean Air Boeing 777 was about to complete a flight from Seoul, Korea to Tokyo, Japan, when it began wavering as it approached its final stop. The plane had been pretty steady all throughout the flight, and then suddenly, it began to swivel and shake pretty violently as it was about to hit the runway. The shaking only intensified as the plane moved closer and closer to the ground, and when it did land on the tarmac, it did so with quite the thud. All 319 passengers and 16 crew members would be safe, although the plane had to stay for about 90 minutes on the tarmac before it could be offloaded. This would be because one of the axles on the landing gear had broken off as a result of the harsh landing, and the plane was unable to move forward. It might have been inconvenient, but I'm pretty sure the passengers were simply glad to be alive. Number 6. Highway to the Danger Zone. In August of 2019, a Washington state trooper was busy on his highway patrol when he noticed something rather strange. A plane was coming down from the sky at a pretty fast rate, and almost in a flash, the aircraft literally landed on the busy road. The entire story became pretty insane. The state trooper had been driving along the road to his next stop when his dash camera caught footage of the plane moving in the other direction and literally descending. According to reports, the plane had lost power while in the air, and the pilot frantically searched for a place to land, and faced with no more options, he then chose to put the plane right down on the road. The trooper eventually followed the plane after touchdown, and the funny thing is that the plane was able to stop just as it got to a traffic light. Even if you're a pilot, traffic laws do still apply, it would seem. The trooper then got out of his car and went to have a word with the pilot, and I think he should have at least been booked with reckless driving. Number 5. A corny landing. Jumping off of our previous entry, here's another interesting landing that gained a lot of praise for the pilot that was involved. In 2019, a Ural Airlines Airbus A320 took off from an international airport in Moscow. However, just a few moments after, the plane then reportedly crashed into a flock of birds, some of which got into the engines and caused a malfunction. It was pretty much almost the same exact story as the Miracle on the Hudson. The only difference, however, in this scenario is that the pilots landed their plane in a cornfield. There wasn't much footage to be had, although some passengers on the plane did manage to capture a video of it descending into the field, which was just a few kilometers from the airport. Miraculously, everyone survived the ordeal, and while this might not have been as dramatic as the Miracle on the Hudson, it was still pretty impressive. Number 4. Who let the cargo out? Planes are truly complex vehicles. There are compartments for everything, and all of these compartments need to be properly closed for the flight to be as seamless as it can be. However, there are also times when some of these compartments may have issues, which leads to a huge imbalance in the plane's movement. A few years ago, an Aerosucher aircraft leaving Colombia would be forced to make an emergency landing after its cargo doors had suddenly opened while it was already in the air. As the footage shows, it was not just a small door that had been thrust open, it was a huge door covering a significant part of the plane. With such a gaping hole, the plane would have been unable to maintain its pressure, and many people would have been directly in harm's way. Fortunately, the pilot was able to get it back on the ground quickly enough. Number 3. Landing at Antonio Nariño Airport. Sometimes a pilot's inability to land smoothly may not necessarily be their fault. In several cases, it could just be that the airport is located in an incredibly difficult area to maneuver. One such airport is the Antonio Nariño Airport in Colombia. Located high in the mountains, this airport can be quite tricky to work with. The terrain is not necessarily smooth, meaning that pilots looking to land down there would need to be incredibly careful. Just check out this footage from a cockpit. The pilot already had to twist a couple of times just to gain his balance, and you can even hear at one point when the cockpit begins to send out a warning.
Terrain, 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 100, 50, 40, 30, 10.
The airport is known for its high winds, which are the result of its location, so before you head there, you had better be prepared. Number 2. SUV collision. Back in 2012, William Davis, a student pilot in Texas, would be taking lessons and practicing landing his single-engine plane at a local airport when he slammed headfirst into an oncoming SUV. The footage was equally as gnarly as you would expect. The collision was quite incredible. Davis's landing gear clipped the SUV, causing the accident. Inspections found that the motorists appeared to have been in the wrong, as there was a stop sign that was in front of them, but they just seemed to miss it.
Why did you pull out in front of an airplane? What I want to know.
We didn't pull out in front of an airplane.
Yes, you did.
The sign was supposed to alert the motorists to stop, but the question is, even if they did miss it, how on earth did they miss the plane? Number 1. Flight 4125. If you know anything about flying, it's that you want the weather to be on your side at every point. Sadly, though, this is not always the case, as has been seen in several videos today. In 2020, American Eagle Flight 4125 would be scheduled to make a landing at Chicago's O'Hare Airport. While the flight had gone swimmingly, there was just one small issue. The airport was more frozen than Snow White's living room, and the runway was very slippery. Footage of the landing would be limited, although we did get some insider video from passengers who were on the flight. Even the landing gear could not resist, and when the plane made contact with the ground, it had lost all of its traction and slid off the runway completely. Fortunately, the plane was able to hit a nearby field, with no one becoming hurt. However, authorities immediately canceled other flight landings at the airport that day. Better not to risk any accidents, I suppose. Situations like these definitely cause you to put things into perspective and make you want to say a prayer or two the next time you get on a plane. But what do you think? Have you been involved in a risky plane landing before? Let us know all about it in the comments section down below.